Misty, you mentioned this story earlier, and I actually found out about this via your Twitter feed. Congressman Thomas Massey, tweeted out this morning, Representative McGovern and I, along with 13 other representatives and Senator Rand Paul, sent this bipartisan letter to President Biden urging him to drop the prosecution of Julian Assange. Dear President Biden, as members of Congress deeply committed to the principles of free speech and freedom of the press, we write to strongly encourage your administration to withdraw the U.S. extradition request currently pending against Australian publisher Julian Assange and halt all prosecutorial proceedings against him as soon as possible. Mr. Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, faces multiple charges under the Espionage Act due to his role in publishing classified documents about the U.S. State Department, Guantanamo Bay, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has been detained on remand in London since 2019 and is pending extradition to the U.S., having lost his appeal of the extradition order in the courts of the United Kingdom. Deep concerns about this case have been repeatedly expressed by international media outlets, human rights and press freedom advocates, and members of Congress, among others. To cite only a few of the commentaries in November 2022, the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and El Pais came together to express their grave concerns about the continued prosecution of Julian Assange for obtaining and publishing classified materials, arguing that publishing is not a crime. We don't have to read this whole letter, obviously, but we can see the signatories here. You do have, like I said, a bipartisan list. The squad's signatures are on here. I know AOC is on here. Rashida Tlaib is on here. Rand Paul is on here. Jamal Bowman is on here. Cori Bush is on here. So you have, a sort of mix of the progressive Democrats and the more populist / libertarian Republicans signing on to this letter, which, Misty, as you said, it's not necessarily a reflection on these politicians so much as it is a reflection of the progress that has been made in at least raising awareness around this.
For sure. Yeah. And listen, I think it's cool that all of these people have signed on to this legislation. Obviously, we need to continue to put pressure on other people to sign on to it. But I would be very careful about giving any of them a whole lot of credit for it. Obviously, they need to be thanked. It needs to be appreciated. But I think that we just need to be mindful of the fact that this is kind of face saving at this point. We've seen that the tide is turning, right? We've seen popular opinion shifting on this. And we all know that that's usually when politicians move on those things, which is what I was saying earlier, that it's mass public pressure. Like the only thing that saves Julian Assange's life is us being able to create enough pressure that they have no choice. And so we're starting to see like cracks in that armor. We're starting to see, and again, this comes off of the heels of last year. I think it was October that the DC-6 from Australia came to the United States. They had meetings with as many members of the Congress as they could possibly get. And those were very productive meetings. Also, there's been lobbying efforts taking place by the Assange community here in the States for a very long time. And obviously that's been very slow to move. But again, these are the people who they don't want Julian Assange freed. You know what I mean? They do not. So it's little by little, but that's this, I think, just shows chinks in the armor. And if you would have, again, like I said earlier, if you would have told me even just 2 years ago that we would have, first of all, legislation, like that's amazing.
Right. Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, but then also that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez signed on to the same bill. I mean, that's a pretty significant movement, I think, for sure. And I think that honestly, and also we can say this about the Australian contingent, it shows, and like I said earlier about the Assange movement in general, it is very bipartisan. When you recognize what the issue actually is, it's not about left or right or blue or red or Trump or Biden. None of that shit matters. It is about all of us. And so not that, members of Congress really think in those terms, but I think that that's how we need to attack it for sure.
Yeah, and the fact that, you could tell the sort of post-partisan or cross-partisan appeal of this case. One of the things that's evidence of that is the fact that, like, AOC didn't feel too icky about signing on to the same letter that Marjorie Taylor Greene signed on to, and vice versa. Because, a lot of the times the way these Congress people think is that it's not
Yes.
even so much about the issue, it's about the ick factor that's going to be put on them if they sign on to the same. I mean, in this case, it's not a bill, it's a letter to the president, but same thing. They don't want to be seen as partnering with a toxic member of the other team.
Yeah.
And, Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC are the, they are the in the bizarro versions of each other in a way, right? And
Yes.
so the fact that they're both willing to sign on to that is evidence of what you said, which is that it is the most. It's not entirely cross-partisan, but it's the most cross-partisan coalition of any major issue
For
nowadays.
sure.
Much more so than even Ukraine, right? Which you would think would be, but it's not, because all the squad members are all in for funding Ukraine, right? So
Right?
like this is really the only one that comes to mind where you can get this kind of consensus from those different sets of actors.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that we got Rand Paul too. When people are thinking about contacting House representatives, which again, if you know me, I don't give a shit about electoral politics. I don't think that that's a game changer. I do think that we could potentially, and I think that we should use all of the tools available to us. So putting pressure on politicians, especially when something like just making a phone call, it takes 2 minutes. I mean, I make them all the time. It takes 2 minutes, 3 maybe. Depends on if you get the answering service or an intern. But they don't take very long, and they're very simple. And so there's no harm in doing them for sure. And I think that that's. But yeah, I think that it's seeing the movement that we have had, and the shift, I think, really more so even to me, that's more impressive than, having bipartisan legislation, although that's insane to me that we have that. But seeing the shift in public opinion, I think that that's where I get the most excited, because that has been noticeable. I mean, like, for example,
sure.
Despite the fact that the UK protests, all of the protests around the world were small, but there were over 60 events in like 14 or 15 different countries. That's amazing. I mean, that is an amazing thing to see that happening all across the globe, and to see that people are getting it. And that's only going to keep building. I just wish it was faster, obviously, for Julian's sake.
Right.
I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I don't mean to be like super morbid or doom and gloom, but he is going to die.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
he's in failing health.
Yes.
I'm honestly, I mean, I hate to say this, I'm honestly surprised that he is still with
Same.
us. I really am.
Same.
Yeah.
And I wake up like every day. Well, not every day. I mean, it's not like I obsess over it, but there are days that I am like, I wake up and I'm like, is today going to be the day? You know what I mean? Because if you examine everything that he's been through over the past 13 years, I mean, he's been incarcerated in some form or another for over a decade. He's been subjected to psychological torture for years and years on end. And that's not me making that up. That's UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, former UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, who examined him along with 2 other physicians who determined that he was in fact a victim of psychological torture. And he continues to be tortured. And Belmarsh, I mean, you mentioned earlier, the conditions there are horrific. They call it the Guantanamo of the UK for a reason. It is awful. And they treat him terribly. They gave him a laptop with the keys glued down. I mean, really? What is the point of that? It's to be an asshole. That is a form of psychological torture. They wouldn't give him his reading glasses. They wouldn't give him his winter clothes one year. And it was freezing in Belmarsh. He was insulating his window with books. He found glass in his food one time. I mean, he doesn't get proper medical care. And we know that he has a whole host of health issues. His visitations with his families are very irregular, and they don't really know, you know what I mean? Like, all of that. And also, I think people need to recognize that the indefiniteness, is that a word? I just made it up if it's not.
I buy it. Yeah.
But the endlessness of this, the idea that he has no idea what his future is there. And in fact, throughout the course of this, obviously we knew in December that these 2 hearing dates would be the 20th and the 21st of February. But generally speaking, we don't get dates for this shit. Shit just happens and we have to react. And he never knows when these decisions are going to come. For example, tomorrow after that hearing, we have no idea when that decision's coming. It could be the end of the day Wednesday. It could be 2 days from then on Friday. It could be 6 months from now. I think the last decision took around 8 or 9 months. And it's just this constant, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no end game, and he's just left in limbo. And I think that alone is just a form of psychological torture, and it's horrific.
Of course.
Yeah. And watching that all play out
for what? For nothing.
Right.
There's no crime.
Right.
There's no
Yeah.
crime.
Zero crime.
Yeah. I mean, if you notice, like they don't even bother trying to make the hacking charge anymore. They tried that for a little while, and then they couldn't because there were no hacked materials, right?
No.
And so all they could do was hand wring about the sensitivity of the information that was leaked, and if the publishing of that material constitutes a crime, then journalism as we know it will never be the same. It's gone. It's done. It's over.
Yeah, they're attempting to criminalize the truth. That's what's happening right now.
Of course.
Please clap.